Today's passage is from 2 Chronicles 33, verses 1 through 17. 2 Chronicles 33, 1 through 17. Manasseh was 12 years old when he became king, and he reigned in Jerusalem 55 years. He did evil in the eyes of the Lord, following the detestable practices of the nations the Lord had driven out before the Israelites. He rebuilt the high places his father Hezekiah had demolished, and erected altars to the Baals, and made Asher poles. He bowed down to all the starry hosts and worshipped them. He built altars in the temple of the Lord, of which the Lord had said, "My name will remain in Jerusalem forever." In both courts of the temple of the Lord, he built altars to the starry host. He sacrificed his sons in the fire in the valley of Ben Hinnom, practiced sorcery, divination, and witchcraft, and consulted mediums and spiritists. He did much evil in the eyes of the Lord, provoking him to anger. He took the carved image he had made and put it in God's temple, of which God had said to David and to his son Solomon, "In this temple and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, I will put my name forever. I will not again make the feet of the Israelites leave the land I assigned your forefathers, if only they will be careful to do everything I commanded them concerning all the laws, decrees, and ordinances given through Moses." But Manasseh led Judah and his people, the people of Jerusalem, astray. So they did more evil than the nations the Lord had destroyed before the Israelites. The Lord spoke to Manasseh and his people, but they paid no attention. So the Lord brought against them the army commanders of the king of Assyria, who took Manasseh prisoner, put a hook in his nose, and bound him with bronze shackles, and took him to Babylon. In his distress he sought the favor of the Lord his God, and humbled himself greatly before the God of his fathers. And when he prayed to him, the Lord was moved by his entreaty, and listened to his plea. So he brought him back to Jerusalem and to his kingdom. Then Manasseh knew that the Lord is God. Afterward he rebuilt the outer wall of the city of David, west of Gishon Spring in the valley, as far as the entrance to the fish gate, and encircling the hill of Ophel. And he made it much higher. He stationed military commanders in all the fortified cities of Judah. He got rid of the foreign gods and removed the images from the temple of the Lord, as well as all the altars he had built on the temple hill and in Jerusalem. And he threw them out of the city. Then he restored the altar of the Lord and sacrificed fellowship offerings and thanks offerings on it, and told Judah to serve the Lord, the God of Israel. The people, however, continued to sacrifice at high places, but only to the Lord their God. Today I want to talk about a question. And this is one of those things that is both a big question for the ages, but it's also a question that's intensely personal for each of us. The question is, do people change? Was Popeye right when he said, "I am that I am, and that's all that I am"? Or can we change? This is one of those questions that people have thought about for ages. And countless philosophers and writers and thinkers have taken this on. And if you get away from Christian circles, the answer has been a resounding no. People don't change. Tastes change. Opinions change. People don't change. Is that true of us? I mean, are we doomed to never change? It was the prophet Jeremiah who coined the phrase, "Can a leopard change its spots?" And we've all heard the old story of the frog and the scorpion. The scorpion asks the frog to give it a ride across the river. And the frog says, "No, you'll sting me." And the scorpion says, "No, I won't. If we're in the river and I sting you, then I'll drown." The frog says, "Okay." The scorpion hops on. Halfway across the river, the scorpion stings the frog. And as the frog is dying, it says, "Why did you do that? Now we're both going to drown." The scorpion said, "You knew what I was when you let me on your back." Is that us? Are we doomed to repeat the same mistakes over and over again? Or can people change? Let me start with the good news. People can change. A recent study from the American Association of Psychology found that people can change. In fact, people do change. As we grow and mature, most people change in life. As we get older, we tend to become more responsible and more emotionally stable. We do change. I like the way Muhammad Ali put this. Ali said, "A man who looks at the world the same way at 50 as he did when he was 20 has wasted 30 years of his life." So we can and do change. But it goes beyond that. Beyond just the changes over life, the study found that intentional change can be brought about in our lives. That through relatively short amounts of work, usually 2 to 3 months, we can see change that lasts a lifetime. What this study found is what Christians have always known. God calls us to repentance because he knows that we can repent, that he has designed in us the ability to grow, to change, that he is at work in our lives. People can change. And today I want to talk about a king who changed. I want to talk about King Manasseh. And Manasseh was an unusual king. Israel and Judah had several good kings and had several really bad kings. And it had a lot of kings that were just mediocre kings. That is, a lot of the kings of Israel and Judah had at least some good intentions, but they lacked conviction to follow through and bring a lasting change to their nations. Manasseh had conviction. It wasn't always well-placed conviction, but he did have conviction. We're told that Manasseh became king when he was 12 years old. And he ruled in Israel for 55 years. The next thing we're told about Manasseh is that he did evil in the eyes of the Lord and was worse than the nations that God had driven out before Israel. That's a new low. When God had given the Israelites the promised land, he repeatedly said that he was not driving out their enemies because the Israelites were such good people. He was saying that their enemies were really that bad. And now Manasseh was walking in their ways. He undid the good work his father Hezekiah had done and then made things worse. He reestablished the fertility temples throughout Israel. And these were temples that also almost always included temple prostitutes. And to be clear, these prostitutes were slaves. So Manasseh was reintroducing sexual slavery and human trafficking into Israel. He even built an altar to a false god in the temple of the Lord, corrupting what was supposed to be the purest place in all Israel. And he practiced human sacrifice, murdering some of his own sons. He was en route to be the worst king in Judah's history. And then everything changed. The Lord acted in Manasseh's life. The nation of Assyria recovered from losses they had suffered, and they invaded Judah again. And this time, no one could even pretend that people were living good lives and deserved God's protection. And so Assyria conquered Israel. They captured Manasseh. They took him back to Babylon in chains. Can you imagine a darker moment in life? The man who had been king found himself in a dungeon in a foreign land. Manasseh was at rock bottom. In this dark moment, God met him there, as God often meets us in our darkest moments. Manasseh was in distress. And distress is one of those words that just feels too small. It doesn't really cover what a big idea is happening. Distress is meant to convey a complete sorrow and suffering and hopelessness. Yet in his hopelessness, God met him because Manasseh humbled himself. And humbled is another word that really doesn't seem to do justice what it's getting across. That Manasseh gave up the idea that he could handle everything, that he knew what was right, that he was always the one with the best plan. He humbled himself, and when he humbled himself, God lifted him up. Now, we're not told a lot of the details of what happened next in 2 Chronicles. We do know that when Manasseh sought the Lord, when he humbled himself, and God brought him out of prison, he brought him back to his homeland and made him king again. And in Manasseh's life, his change stuck. Manasseh remained a changed man. He undid the terrible things he had done. He tore down the idols and the false temples. He destroyed the idol he had made in the temple of the Lord. He ended the forced prostitution and the child sacrifices. He called the people back to the God who actually cared about how they lived. Manasseh was a changed man. And I think when we look at Manasseh's life, we can see three truths about how change works in our lives. First, God changes us. Every step of the way, it is the Lord who is working on Manasseh's life. It was the Lord who sent prophets to tell Manasseh the truth. It was the Lord who brought the Assyrian army against Judah and against Manasseh. It was the Lord who met Manasseh at his darkest moment. It was the Lord who lifted him up. Every step of the way, God was at work. Now, I'm going to come back to this in a moment. So right now, I just want to say that God is the one who changes us. God changes us in one of two ways. Either we say to God, "Thy will be done," and God works in our lives. Or God says to us, "We're doing this my way now." And then God works in our lives. Manasseh experienced the second version, which is usually a lot less pleasant. But God did change Manasseh's life. And this leads me right into the second thing we can learn about change from Manasseh. Change might require an extreme act from God. To say that what God did in Manasseh's life was extreme is probably an understatement. Manasseh was defeated in war. He was taken prisoner. He was sent to a dungeon where he's probably spent months, if not years, in this dungeon in a foreign land. God took an extreme act. There's an old story about a football coach talking to an assistant coach about recruitment. And this head coach said to the assistant coach, "When you're out recruiting in football, sometimes you're going to find a guy who gets knocked down and he stays down." The assistant coach said, "Well, I don't want that guy on the team." Head coach said, "That's right. There are other guys who get knocked down and they get back up. If you knock them down again, they stay down." Assistant coach said, "I don't want that guy either." Coach said, "Correct. But there's some guys. They get knocked down, they get back up, they get knocked down, they get back up. No matter how many times you knock them down, they keep getting up." Assistant coach said, "That's the guy I want." And the head coach said, "No, I want you to get the guy knocking everybody else down." I think we all know what it's like to get knocked down. We might not hit rock bottom, but we know what it's like to get hit. We know what it's like to feel in distress. But it's in those moments of distress, it's in our darkest moments that God often meets us, that God works a change in our lives. And this brings me to the third truth about change. Change takes time. This may be the most difficult one for us to accept, because if there's one thing that defines our society, it is instant gratification. I want what I want when I want it. I expect it to happen now, and this should really be true about my life. If I want to change, I should wake up the next morning a changed person. I shouldn't really have to wait till the next morning. I mean, I'm me. I get to decide how my life works. The confusing reality is that's not how our lives work. Change takes time. Manasseh's change was recorded very quickly, but the reality was this change probably took several months, perhaps years of his life before he was truly changed. And in our lives today, change takes time. When I started this sermon, I mentioned a survey from the American Psychological Association, which said that people do change, but it also found that change takes time. that people who expect immediate change usually found no change in their life. If someone thought that they could just change by changing their mind, or thought they would change in a single counseling session or a weekend retreat, usually that was not a change that lasted. But when people committed to change over the long run, when they focused on change for 8 to 12 weeks, they often found that this change would stay in their lives for years to come. Change takes time. So I've talked a lot about change today, but how do we get there? How can we have a changed life? Well, I want to close today's sermon by talking about four steps for a changed life. First step to a changed life is self-awareness. We need to recognize our need to change, and we need to understand why we need to change. For most of his life, this was Manasseh's problem. He didn't see a need to change. I won't go so far as to say his way was working, but at the very least, his way was letting him get by. It took an extreme act from God for Manasseh to see his need to change. If we are going to have change in our life, it has to start with self-awareness. We need to be able to clearly state why we want to change. It starts with self-awareness. Second, we need to remember that change comes from God. I mentioned this earlier, but this is a big part of change. If we are trying to have a change in our life, the worst thing we can do is just try to white knuckle through, hold on, and change my life by force of will. It usually doesn't work. Change comes from God. Change comes from turning to the God who has the power to change us. It comes through prayer and meditation. It comes from turning our eyes to God instead of looking to myself for change. It comes from using what God has given us. We have a Holy Spirit who lives within us. We have a God who is eager to make us new. If we are going to be changed, we need to turn to Him. Imagine two boys standing at the base of the stairs of the Empire State Building. And one of the boys says, "I'll race you to the top." And he takes off running, he goes up the first flight, turns the corner, starts up the second flight, and the second boy watches him go and then walks over and takes the elevator. And there's part of you that wants to say, that's cheating. Well, you know what? The second boy is going to make it to the top. That first boy might, and this is a really big might, he might somehow make it up 102 flights of stairs. Probably not, but it could happen. But that second boy who took the elevator is going to get there. If we are going to try to change our lives by our own strength, we're playing to our weaknesses. But we have a God who changes us. And if we want to see real change in our lives, we need to remember that God is the one who brings that change. Third step to change is a commitment to change. As I said, change takes time. It's not something that happens overnight. If we are going to live changed lives, then we need to commit to change. We need to have a time of focus on change, and we need to have a plan for change. We need to have a plan for what a changed life looks like. We need to have a plan for turning to God. We need to have a plan for when the temptation to go back to our old ways comes along. And we all know that temptation is coming along. We have a plan for turning to God. Because change doesn't happen in an instant. But when we have a commitment to change, when we know what change we desire and we know why we want to change, and that sets us on a path to change. Fourth and finally, get help. We don't have to do this alone. We can find help in a variety of ways. Sometimes all we need is someone to talk to. Sometimes we might need a professional counselor. Sometimes we might need group support. But get help to change. Something I've talked about several times is the value of an accountability partner. An accountability partner is someone that you can talk to about your desire to change. Someone where you will have a regular time of meeting together, of getting together in person or talking on the phone at least once every week to discuss your effort in changing your life. Find someone you trust. I recommend it being someone of the same gender. I don't recommend your spouse for this. Husbands and wives have a relationship like none other, but they don't tend to make the best accountability partners. Because an accountability partner needs to be someone who is disinterested in your change. I don't mean uninterested. Uninterested means they don't care about what happens in your life. Disinterested means it's not about them. That when you're talking about your goal of changing your life, their only interest is seeing you change. There is no benefit to them for this. A husband and wife can't have that kind of relationship. They shouldn't have that kind of relationship. A husband and wife are one flesh. What happens to one happens to the other. That is an unbelievable, amazing relationship, but it doesn't really work for an accountability partner. We need someone who's focused on your change. So get help. Find someone you trust who can commit to helping you change. We live in a world that says people don't change. But we have a God who says, I am making all things new. Don't buy in to the world's lies. We can change. We have a God who changes us. It takes time, and it might take an extreme act from our God to make it happen. But our God changes us. In a moment, we're going to stand and sing our invitation. And as we stand to sing, if you've been trying to do it yourself, if you've been trying to change your own life by your own force of will, and you're saying it's not working, if you need a God who changes you, you have an opportunity. This week, talk to myself, talk to one of the elders, or even right now, if you need to make your commitment to Him, you have a chance. I ask you, stand with me now for invitation hymn, which is already washed in the blood, number 190, and we'll sing just the first verse.